Hey, wide awake family. If you're not part of the family yet and love creepy stories, then hit that subscribe button and join us. Tap the bell icon so you'll never miss a story. It really helps out the channel. If you've already done all that, then smash that like button to lock it in, and please tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I would love to interact with you legends. Now to the story.
I thought it was going to be one of those normal first dates you forget about in a week. Dinner, some laughs, maybe a drink, then head home. Nothing intense. She seemed cool enough when we matched, kind of quiet but funny in her own way. We met up at this small Italian place just outside the city. It wasn't crowded, just dim lights, music in the background, and a couple of other tables filled. Things started out fine. We ordered food, talked about work, random hobbies, the usual. I wouldn't say there was fireworks, but she was easy to talk to. Halfway through the meal, her phone rang. She looked at the screen, and something in her face just changed. She excused herself and went outside to take it. I didn't think anything of it, just kept scrolling through the menu, sipping on my drink. When she came back, it was like I was looking at a different person. Her face was pale, eyes darting around, and she couldn't sit still. I asked if everything was okay, but she didn't answer my question. Instead, she leaned in, whispered something about needing to leave, and told me I had to drive her out of town immediately. The way she said it wasn't a suggestion. It was urgent, like the room was on fire and I was just sitting there not realizing it. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We paid, walked out, and got into my car. The second the doors closed, she started directing me. No explanations, no details, just quick instructions. Highway north, keep going straight, don't stop. At first, I thought maybe something bad had happened. Family emergency, or someone following her, something serious. The way she clutched her phone and kept glancing at the mirrors had me convinced she was running from something. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, the story started to feel off. We were flying down the highway, city lights fading behind us, nothing but dark fields and empty road ahead. She wouldn't explain what was happening. Every time I asked, she either ignored me or snapped at me to just drive. My hands gripped the wheel tighter. I told myself I could turn around any time, but the way she kept watching me made it clear she wasn't going to let that happen. The deeper we went, the stranger it felt. She had me take random exits, then get back on, then turn down small roads that cut through stretches of woods. No towns, no houses, just endless dark. At one point, I realized my phone had lost service. That was when the panic really started creeping in. I glanced over at her and noticed she wasn't just tense. She looked almost excited. Her breathing was uneven, and her grip on her phone was so tight her knuckles were white. It didn't feel like she was running from danger. It felt like she was leading me to it. We passed an old gas station, the kind that looks abandoned, and she told me to turn there. The place was lit by a single flickering bulb, and I slowed down, telling myself this was my chance to pull away. But she leaned forward, pointing down the dirt road behind it, urging me to keep going. The dirt road stretched forever. My headlights bounced over potholes, trees pressing in closer on both sides. My chest felt heavy, and I kept thinking about how no one knew where I was. No one knew I was with her. She could have been leading me to anything. People waiting, some kind of setup, I didn't know. Finally, the road opened up to a clearing. There were a few broken down sheds, piles of junk, and a fire pit that looked like it had been used recently. She told me to stop the car. My stomach dropped. The second we stopped, she snapped out of the car and disappeared into the dark, like she knew exactly where she was going. I sat there frozen, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I didn't know if I was supposed to follow her or turn around and bolt. After a minute that felt like forever, I put the car back in gear and turned it around. My headlights swung across the clearing, catching her in the beams for just a second. She was standing near one of the sheds, looking straight at me, expression blank. It was the kind of look that sticks in your brain, cold and unreadable. I didn't wait. I floated back down the dirt road, the car rattling, branches scraping the sides. I didn't care if she screamed after me. I didn't care if I looked insane. I just needed to get out. It took nearly 2 hours to find my way back to the city. My phone eventually lit back up with service, but I didn't call anyone. I just drove straight home, locked the door, and sat there in the dark, trying to piece together what the hell had just happened. She messaged me later that night, just one line, "You shouldn't have left." I blocked her instantly. I still don't know where she was leading me or what would have happened if I'd stayed. And honestly, I don't want to know. I didn't think one date would turn into a nightmare, but it did. It wasn't even a bad date, just bland. Dinner, small talk, the kind of night you forget about the moment it's over. He wasn't rude, he wasn't creepy, but there was no spark either. If anything, he struck me as forgettable. The kind of man you meet once and never think about again. When he messaged me later asking to hang out again, I politely told him I didn't see it going anywhere. He said, "No worries," with a smiley face, and I figured that would be the end of it. The next morning, I went to the gym like I always do. It was early, the sky outside still heavy with gray, the place half empty except for a few regulars. I was halfway through warming up on the treadmill when I noticed him. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and I blinked, convincing myself I was wrong. But there he was a few treadmills over, in the exact same outfit he wore on our date. Black hoodie, gray joggers, white sneakers. He jogged slowly, his eyes fixed straight ahead. My stomach tightened. The gym wasn't anywhere near the restaurant we'd gone to, and I knew for a fact I hadn't mentioned where I worked out. I told myself it was just a coincidence. Big city, lots of gyms, maybe he lived nearby. But then he glanced sideways just briefly, and there was no surprise in his face. None. He knew I'd be there. I cut my workout short, wiped down the machine with trembling hands, and tried to act normal as I headed for the door. My reflection followed me in the long wall of mirrors, my eyes darting to see if he was coming after me. He didn't. He just kept jogging, slow and steady, like he wanted me to know he wasn't in a hurry. That evening I ran into him again. The grocery store was nearly empty, just a few tired parents and college kids grabbing snacks. I was in the produce aisle, absently picking through apples when I felt someone behind me. The air shifted, the way it does when someone's close enough to touch. I turned, and there he was, leaning casually on his cart, watching me with that same faint smile. My throat went dry. "Hi," I tried, though the word came out strangled. He didn't answer, just smiled again, the kind of smile that wasn't friendly, wasn't warm, just there. And he turned his cart and started down the next aisle. I thought maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe he was just another shopper, but every corner I turned, he was there. A few feet behind, always behind. I sped through my list, tossing random things into my basket just to finish faster. My palms were damp, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the bags. When I finally reached the checkout, my chest felt so tight I could hardly breathe. As I shoved my cart toward the parking lot, I looked up and froze. He was leaning against his car across the lot, arms folded, still smiling. I drove home with my heart pounding so loud I thought it might drown out the hum of the engine. Every set of headlights behind me felt like his, every turn of the streetlights casting shadows that looked like him. That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside my window made me sit bolt upright. The crunch of leaves, the slam of a distant car door, even the low hum of the refrigerator made my chest clench. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe it was just bad timing. Maybe it really was coincidence. But deep down, my gut whispered otherwise. The next day proved me right. I was at work, halfway through a dull afternoon, when I noticed movement outside the glass doors of the office. At first, I ignored it. The feeling wouldn't let me go. I finally glanced up, and my stomach dropped. He was standing there, not walking past, not waiting for someone, just standing on the sidewalk, facing the building. Minutes ticked by. He didn't move. My coworkers noticed eventually. They joked about the weird guy outside, laughing nervously, but I couldn't laugh. My hands shook so badly I could hardly type. My skin prickled with the sensation of being watched. At one point, I slipped into the bathroom, locked the stall, and splashed water on my face, trying to slow the racing of my heart. He stayed for nearly an hour, sometimes pacing, sometimes leaning against the wall, sometimes standing perfectly still, his head tilted slightly, eyes on the door. By the time he finally left, I felt hollowed out, drained, like all the energy had been sucked from me. My body buzzed with adrenaline, my head pounded. I couldn't focus on work. I couldn't focus on anything but that image, him outside, waiting. That evening, I deleted the dating app we met on. I blocked his number. I convinced myself that would be enough. But paranoia doesn't need proof to survive. Everywhere I went, I looked over my shoulder. Every car that slowed near my house made my skin crawl. Every stranger who lingered too long in a store felt like him. I stopped going to the gym. I ordered groceries online. I asked a coworker to walk me in my car each night. I tried to laugh it off, tried to tell myself I was safe. but the memory of him standing outside my office wouldn't let me rest. And it wasn't just where I saw him, it was how he acted. Calm, casual, like this was normal, like I was supposed to get used to it. I never saw him again after that week. Maybe blocking him worked. Maybe he got bored. Maybe he found someone else. But even now, months later, I catch myself scanning crowds, watching mirrors. My stomach knots whenever I hear footsteps behind me. And the part that scares me most isn't the nights I caught him watching. It's the nights I didn't. The ones I'll never know about. Because if he could find me at the gym, at the grocery store, at work, places I never told him about, how many other places did he follow me quietly without me ever noticing?
Hey guys, really sorry to interrupt. If you're still listening, then you're enjoying the story so far. And if you are enjoying, then please hit that like button. That's all I ask of you. Thanks so much. Now back to the stories.
I should have turned around the second I saw her wave at me from the bar. She was already holding a drink, glass half empty, with a big grin plastered across her face like we were old friends. I told myself it was fine. Plenty of people order a drink while waiting. But there was something about the way she raised it, almost triumphant, that made me pause. The pace she was going at, I didn't realize how bad it would get. The bar wasn't anything fancy, just a noisy neighborhood spot with neon lights buzzing in the windows, sticky tables that clung to your elbows, and the faint smell of stale beer baked into the wood. A Friday night crowd was already forming, people shouting over the music, bartenders rushing by with trays of cheap drafts and cocktails. It was crowded but manageable, the kind of place where you could fade into the background if you wanted. I thought it would be safe, an easy, low-stakes place for a first date. At first, she seemed fun, outgoing, chatty, quick to laugh. She leaned in close when she talked, brushing my arm as if we'd known each other longer than a handful of text messages. There was an energy to her, the kind that makes you feel like maybe the night will be better than you hoped. For a brief moment, I thought, okay, maybe this could work. But then she ordered another drink and then another. By the time I'd barely finished my first, she was waving down the bartender for her third. She gulped it like water, tilting her head back and swallowing in huge mouthfuls, barely pausing to taste it. Her words began to slur just a little, but her energy didn't fade, it ramped up. She grew louder, more animated, her laughter booming over the music, leaning back in her chair to laugh at things that weren't even funny. I tried to keep the conversation going, but she wasn't interested in talking anymore. She was interested in drinking. Every few minutes, her hand shot up, flagging down the bartender with impatient snaps of her fingers. He gave me a look, that quick, knowing glance bartenders give when they want to ask, "Are you sure about this?" Her cheeks flushed, her eyes went glassy, and her smile sharpened into something manic. That's when the yelling started. It wasn't at me, it was at random people around us. A guy brushed past her chair, barely touching it, and she snapped, shouting at him to watch where he was going. A group at the next table laughed at some private joke, and she spun around, accusing them of talking about her. Her voice cut through the bar like a siren, sharp and sudden, and heads turned. I sank lower in my seat, wishing I could disappear. The bartender shot me another look, this one less questioning and more annoyed, as if I were responsible for her behavior. I muttered something about her just being a little tipsy and tried to calm her down, but she brushed me off with a wave of her hand and ordered another round like nothing had happened. My stomach was tight. My fingers fidgeted beneath the table, twisting together, but I stayed. I don't even know why. Maybe I thought I could salvage it, that it would settle down. Maybe I didn't want to cause a bigger scene by standing up and walking out. But it only got worse. She started picking people out of the crowd, targeting them one by one. Couples, groups of friends, strangers who made the mistake of glancing her way. She hurled insults, daring them to respond. Most ignored her, their eyes flicking toward me with that same unspoken judgment. Control your date. The tension in the room thickened. I could feel the heat of stares on my skin like spotlights. I wanted to vanish into the floor. Then she turned on a woman sitting a few stools down at the bar. I don't even know what set it off. Maybe the woman looked at her the wrong way, or maybe she didn't look at her at all. But suddenly my date was on her feet, shouting, pointing, knocking over her glass in the process. The drink spilled across the table, dripping onto the floor, but she didn't even notice. The woman tried to ignore it, her shoulders stiff, but my date shoved closer, swearing and demanding a reaction. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I scrambled up, grabbing her arm, trying to pull her back, whispering to her to sit down, to let it go. She yanked her arm out of my grasp with surprising force, screaming louder now. Chairs scraped. People stood. Conversations died. The whole bar froze, waiting for violence to erupt. The woman finally snapped, shouting back, her voice sharp and cutting. My date lunged toward her, rage twisting her face, and for a split second I thought fists were about to fly. But the bartender was faster. He stepped in, blocking her path, his expression tight with anger. He told her to calm down or leave, his voice firm enough to cut through the chaos. She didn't listen. She kept shouting, spit flying from her lips, arms flailing. And then the bouncer arrived. That was it. He grabbed her firmly by the arms, driving her toward the door as she kicked and screamed, her voice echoing through the bar like some wild animal caught in a trap. She twisted in his grip, her eyes locking on mine, wide and wild. "Come with me," she shrieked, as if this were some Bonnie and Clyde moment we were sharing. I froze. My face burned as every eye in the bar turned toward me. My body felt heavy, pinned by embarrassment and fear. I shook my head, rooted to the spot. The bouncer shoved her outside, the door slamming shut behind her, muffling but not silencing her screams. The bartender gave me a sharp look, arms crossed, waiting. My throat was dry. I muttered something about paying the tab, fumbling for my card with trembling hands. My ears rang with the echoes of her voice, my body hot with shame. When I finally stepped outside, she was gone, just vanished into the night, leaving only silence in her wake. I stood there for a moment, the cool air biting against my flushed face, and then walked quickly in the opposite direction, desperate to put distance between us. That night, I blocked her number, deleted the app, and sat in the quiet of my apartment replaying it all in my head. The speed of it. How fast it had gone from promising to chaotic to terrifying. From a smile at the bar to being dragged out screaming in less than an hour. One drink after another until the whole place was caught in her storm. It wasn't just a bad date. It was watching someone unravel in real time, pulling everyone around them into it. And being trapped there, tethered to the wreckage, guilty by nothing more than saying yes to a drink with the wrong person. I knew something was wrong the second the conversation flipped from small talk to something darker. Up until that point, the date had been fine. Not great, not terrible, just fine. We met at a casual restaurant, grabbed drinks, and were talking about the usual boring stuff people talk about on first dates. Favorite foods, TV shows, random stories about work. It felt normal. Safe. Then, out of nowhere, he leaned in a little and started describing something I'll never forget. He told me in chilling detail that he'd always fantasized about kidnapping someone on a first date. He said it casually, like it was just another fun fact about himself. At first, I froze. My brain couldn't process what I just heard. He smiled, almost laughing, and brushed it off like it was a joke. But the way he said it didn't sound like a joke. His tone wasn't playful. It was flat, steady, too specific. I tried to laugh weakly to brush past it, but he wouldn't let it go. He kept circling back to it. He described how easy it would be, how no one would expect it, how meeting someone new gave the perfect opportunity. Each time he said it, he chuckled like he was testing how I'd react. My chest tightened. I forced myself to sip my drink, pretending I wasn't panicking inside. I kept glancing around the restaurant, noting how many people were there, how close the exits were. My heart thudded in my ears, but I kept my expression calm. I didn't want to set him off. He leaned back in his chair, eyes locked on me, and started adding more detail. He talked about where he'd take someone, how he'd plan it so nobody would notice, the way he'd make sure the person couldn't leave. His words spilled out with this eerie casualness, like he'd thought about it 100 times. I nodded weakly, pretending to find it edgy or weirdly funny, but inside my hands were trembling under the table. The longer he talked, the less it felt like a joke. The waitress came by to check on us, and for a brief moment I felt relief. I clung to that small window of safety, smiling too brightly, thanking her maybe a little too much. He stayed quiet until she walked away, then leaned forward again, lowering his voice this time. He told me how easy it would be to get someone into a car if they thought they were just being dropped off. My throat tightened. I wanted to leave, but I was scared of how he'd react if I bolted. His eyes stayed locked on me, unblinking like he was studying every twitch in my face. I thought about making an excuse, saying I had to go, but my voice felt stuck. Instead, I tried to steer the conversation somewhere else, work, family, anything. But he kept circling back, weaving the fantasy into everything we talked about. If I mentioned traveling, he'd say airports were the perfect place to grab someone unnoticed. If I mentioned walking at night, he'd say how simple it would be to follow. Every sentence was laced with it. Every laugh he gave was forced, sharp, like he was daring me to call him out. The food came and I barely touched mine. My appetite was gone, my stomach twisted in knots. He ate slowly, deliberately, like he had all the time in the world. His eyes flicked up every so often, catching mine, making sure I was still listening. I thought about texting a friend, but my phone was on the table and I didn't want him to see. I thought about excusing myself to the bathroom, but the idea of turning my back on him made my skin crawl. So I sat there, forcing small smiles, praying for the night to end. Finally, the check came. He reached for it, still smiling, still calm, and I muttered that I'd get the next one. My voice cracked slightly, betraying the fear I've been trying to hide. He didn't comment, just kept smiling, sliding his card across the table. When we walked outside, the air felt colder. The parking lot was dimly lit, and my chest tightened again. He offered to walk me to my car, but I shook my head quickly, saying I was fine. My voice came out too fast, too sharp, but I didn't care. He stood there, watching me as I walked away. I could feel his eyes on my back the whole time. My hands fumbled with my keys, my heart pounding as I unlocked my car. I slid inside, locked the doors immediately, and drove off without looking back. The messages started that night. He sent me laughing emojis, followed by lines about how it had been so fun to mess with. He said he hoped I wasn't too scared, that he wasn't really like that. But the way the words read on my screen didn't feel like reassurance. They felt like a warning. I blocked his number right then. But I'll never forget the way he looked at me across that table. Calm, steady, unblinking. And the way he kept repeating those fantasies like he wanted me to know he'd thought them through. It wasn't just a bad date. It was sitting across from someone who wanted me to know exactly what they were capable of. I wasn't expecting the night to turn into babysitting duty. The plan was simple: dinner at a decent restaurant, some small talk, see if there was any chemistry. Normal first date stuff. Nothing dramatic, nothing complicated. I thought I had a handle on what to expect. The date started out fine. She showed up looking like her pictures, maybe even a little better in person. She had this bubbly way of talking, fast and animated, her words tumbling over each other like she was in a race to get them all out. I found myself relaxing almost immediately. The restaurant was busy but not overwhelming, the kind of place where conversations rose and fell in a warm hum, where silverware clinked softly against plates. Dim lighting gave everything a golden tint, and the smell of garlic and grilled meat hung in the air. It felt like the perfect, safe setting for a first date. We ordered food, cracked a few jokes, swapped the usual stories about work and hobbies. Nothing heavy and nothing weird. She told me about her favorite movies, and I shared a story about a trip I'd taken recently. We laughed at something small, and for a moment I thought, okay, this might not be so bad. I was sipping my drink, listening to her animatedly describe some rom-com she loved when it happened. Out of nowhere, this random woman walked up to our table with a toddler and towel. No introduction, no explanation. She didn't even make eye contact with me. She just lifted the kid up and plopped him down in the empty chair next to my date, like it had been reserved for him all along. Then she walked away. Just like that. I blinked, confused, my fork hovering halfway to my mouth. My brain struggled to process what I'd just seen. My date, on the other hand, barely flinched. She gave the kid a quick smile, then looked back at me with an almost sheepish shrug. Then she dropped it, the line that made my stomach sink. "He's mine," she said casually, like she was telling me the time. I probably should mention that earlier. I froze. My fork hovered above my plate, my appetite vanishing. She hadn't mentioned a kid once in our chats, not a single word about being a mom. And now, halfway through dinner, here he was, squirming in his chair, banging his little fists against the table like a tiny drummer. My date handed him a spoon to play with, totally unfazed, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. Then she looked at me expectantly, waiting for a reaction. My mouth was dry. I nodded awkwardly, forcing a tight smile, trying to process the sudden shift in reality. The air at the table changed immediately. What had been casual, easy conversation now felt like a test. Every word, every gesture seemed weighted. She leaned in, smiling faintly, and said something about hoping I was good with kids. It wasn't really a question. It was an expectation. The toddler grabbed at the napkins, crumpling them into soggy wads. Then he reached for the salt shaker, rattling it dangerously close to the edge. When I set my phone down for just a second, his little hand shot out, swiping for it. "Careful there, buddy," I muttered, pulling it back quickly. He giggled in response, then knocked over my water glass with a sharp swipe of his arm. Water spread across the table in a glittering flood. I scrambled to mop it up with napkins, my heart racing as nearby diners turned their heads at the commotion. My date just laughed lightly, like it was adorable. "He's a handful," she said, as if that explained everything. I kept glancing around the restaurant, feeling the heat of curious stares. My face burned. I was suddenly hyper-aware of how loud the toddler was, how disruptive. The clattering spoon, the squeals, the thump of his fists on the table, all of it amplified in my ears. She, meanwhile, was completely calm, almost serene. It was as though this chaos was part of some plan, part of the evening she'd orchestrated. The rhythm of the night grew stranger as it went on. 1 second, she was chatting with me like nothing was wrong, asking me about my future goals. The next, she was scolding the toddler gently, telling him to stop throwing food, to sit still, to be a good boy. Then, without missing a beat, she turned back to me, repeating her question, eyes locked on mine like she hadn't just broken the flow of conversation. Every time she asked me something personal, about family, about kids, about what I wanted long term, her gaze would flick to the toddler, then back to me, like he was part of the conversation. Like my answers were being graded not just by her, but by him too. The kid eventually grew restless, whining and wriggling, and then it happened, the wailing. A sharp, piercing cry that seemed to shake the walls. His face scrunched up, tears spilling down his cheeks, his little body thrashing in frustration. The sound cut through the restaurant like a siren. My date didn't panic. She stayed calm, bouncing him gently on her lap, murmuring soothing words. But her eyes, they stayed on me, watching me, measuring me. I forced a weak smile, my hands trembling slightly under the table, as if I could prove through body language alone that I was patient, understanding. Inside, though, my chest was tight, my pulse hammering. This wasn't a date anymore. It was an audition. An audition for a role I had no intention of playing. I muttered something about how late it was getting, my voice cracking. She nodded faintly, still focused on the toddler, but there was something in her expression, not disappointment exactly, more like a quiet confirmation, like she'd already predicted how this would end. I stood quickly, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I should get going," I said, fumbling for my jacket. She gave me this look, calm, knowing, almost smug. I didn't look back as I walked out, didn't want to see them sitting there side by side, watching me leave. The night air hit me like a shock, cool and sharp, as if I'd been holding my breath for hours. My chest ached as I walked briskly to my car, hand shaking as I pulled out my keys. When I got home, I blocked her number immediately, deleted the app too. The thought of her calling again, of her showing up with that child without warning, made my skin crawl. It wasn't just the fact that she had a kid. It was the way she revealed it, the casual shrug, the unspoken test, the way she seemed to expect me to step into a role I'd never agreed to audition for. That was the last first date I ever walked into blind. Because sometimes the scariest surprises aren't the ones people warn you about. They're the ones sitting across the table, smiling, waiting to see if you'll stay or run. I'll never forget the feeling I had when the car door shut and I realized something wasn't right. The date itself wasn't anything special. Honestly, it was almost mooring in how average it felt. He was decent enough, not amazing, not awful. Just one of those nights you expect to end with an awkward hug and maybe a polite text the next day. Dinner, some small talk, one drink afterward. Nothing about it screamed danger. By the time we wrapped up, it was late, and I was tired. I pulled out my phone to order a ride, already half dreaming about getting home, washing my face, and collapsing into bed. But he stopped me with a raised hand and a smile. "Don't worry about it," he said smoothly. "I'll call one for you." I hesitated, but only for a moment. I figured it was nice of him, maybe even gentlemanly. Less work for me. I slipped my phone back into my bag and let him handle it. We stood on the curb outside the restaurant, the night quiet except for the occasional car rolling by. The air smelled faintly of fried food drifting from the kitchen vents. He kept glancing at his phone, his thumb flicking across the screen, and then finally he pointed down the block. A dark sedan pulled up. It looked plain. Too plain. No rideshare logo, no little glowing sign on the dashboard, no printed sticker in the window. Just a nondescript car with tinted windows that reflected the streetlights like dark water. "That's yours," he said, motioning me forward. My stomach tightened instantly. Something about it felt off, but he was watching me, smiling like everything was normal. I told myself maybe the company had changed policies, maybe they didn't require stickers anymore. I didn't want to be rude or paranoid. The driver leaned over and popped the door open without saying a word. I hesitated for a beat too long. Then, against my better judgment, I climbed inside. The door shut behind me with a heavy mechanical thud, the kind of sound that seemed to seal me in rather than welcome me. And that's when I noticed. There were no handles on the inside. At least not where they should have been. Just smooth, unbroken panels. My chest clenched tight. I shifted in my seat, pretending to adjust my jacket, but my hand kept brushing the door, searching for an exit that wasn't there. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror. His eyes met mine, flat, unblinking, unreadable. He didn't ask my name. He didn't confirm the destination. He just gripped the wheel, shifted into drive, and pulled away from the curb. The restaurant lights blurred behind us, swallowed by the dark streets. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I pressed my phone against my thigh, gripping it like it could anchor me. I checked the screen quickly, praying to see the rideshare app confirming a trip. But there was nothing. No notification. No receipt. He hadn't called me a ride at all. I swallowed hard, the back of my throat raw. I looked out the window, trying to memorize every street sign, but he kept turning. Left then right, then another right. Each corner led us into darker, quieter streets, farther from the main road, farther from the city lights. The silence was unbearable. No radio, no small talk. Just the steady hum of the engine and the occasional squeal of the tires on the pavement. I thought about speaking up, about demanding to know where we were going, but my throat felt locked shut. My gut screamed at me that if I pushed too hard, he might snap. The way his hands gripped the wheel, knuckles white, veins bulging, told me I wasn't dealing with someone casual. We stopped at a red light. For a moment, I thought maybe this was my chance. Maybe the locks would click open automatically, maybe I could run. My hand hovered near the door lock, testing it gently. It didn't move. The car stayed sealed, like a cage. My chest burned. I could hear my pulse rushing in my ears, faster, harder. Then the driver looked at me again through the mirror, our eyes locked. My stomach dropped. He knew. He knew I was testing the lock. He knew I wanted out. I jerked my hand back into my lap, forcing myself to breathe slowly, evenly, pretending I was calm. Pretending I wasn't seconds away from breaking down completely. I slipped my phone under the table in my purse and typed a message blindly, my fingers fumbling over the screen. I shared my location with a friend, praying the signal would go through. But the little spinning icon circled and circled, mocking me. No confirmation. No safety net. The car kept moving deeper into the dark. The streetlights grew sparse. Houses thinned out. It was just empty stretches of road, broken fences, shadows flickering against the glass. My imagination ran wild with possibilities. Where was he taking me? What was waiting at the end of this road? And then suddenly, we slowed. My pulse spiked so hard I thought I might faint. The car turned sharply, pulling into a gas station glowing against the dark like a beacon. Bright floodlights lit the pumps. A few people stood around smoking, their voices carrying in the night air. The driver's jaw tightened. He muttered something under his breath, too low for me to hear. Then, click, a lock's released. The sound nearly made me jump out of my skin. I didn't hesitate. I shoved the door open so fast it banged against the post. I stumbled out, nearly tripping over my own feet, my legs trembling violently as I scrambled across the pavement. I didn't look back. I didn't care if he called after me, if the other customers stared. I just pushed through the doors of the gas station store, the bright fluorescent lights washing over me, harsh and safe all at once. My chest heaved as I clutched the counter, my phone slick in my sweaty hands. Through the glass, I saw the car idle for a few seconds. The driver didn't get out. He didn't look at me again. Then slowly he pulled away, his taillights shrinking until they disappeared into the dark. I never saw him again. I never spoke to the guy from the date again either. I blocked his number before I even left the gas station. But I can't forget that heavy silence in the car, the missing handles, the way the driver's eyes lock on mine in the mirror, cold and calculating. And the thought that still keeps me up at night is the simplest one of all. What would have happened if he hadn't stopped at that gas station? I should have known this one was going to be weird when she sat down and immediately started apologizing for being emotional. We hadn't even ordered yet. I figured maybe she'd had a rough day. Everyone's human. Nerves hit people differently on first dates, right? A little vulnerability, a little oversharing. It happens. But I wasn't prepared for how quickly things would spiral. We'd matched just a couple of days before. Her profile seemed normal enough. Smiling selfies in front of murals, a picture of her holding an iced latte, captions about loving animals. Nothing out of the ordinary. She messaged me first, which I took as a good sign. Meant she was interested, confident. We chatted a bit, swapped some jokes, and set up a coffee date for the weekend. I thought it'd be easy. Low pressure. Just two people meeting up for a drink to see if there was a spark. The cafe was quiet when I arrived. The low hum of an espresso machine, soft indie music playing in the background, a couple of students buried in laptops. Relaxed atmosphere. She showed up a little late, rushing through the door with messy hair, oversized sunglasses, and the kind of energy that made the whole room turn. Sorry, she blurted, hugging me before I could react. The hug lingered too long, her arms tightening like we were old friends instead of strangers. We sat down, and I tried to break the ice with some small talk. Work, hobbies, the usual, but her eyes were already glassy, her breath uneven. Within 15 minutes, she completely broke down. It started small, a sniffle, a trembling hand wiping under her sunglasses. Then she pulled out her phone, swiping quickly until she found what she wanted. She slid across the table toward me with shaking hands. At first, I thought she was showing vacation photos or maybe something funny to lighten the mood. But no. It was pictures of animals. Dead ones. Dogs with lifeless eyes, a cat lying stiff on a blanket, a rabbit curled unnaturally. She was sobbing uncontrollably now, swiping through each photo with trembling fingers. Her voice cracked as she mumbled the stories behind each one. How this dog had cancer. How that cat got hit by a car. How the rabbit just stopped breathing one day, and how unfair it was. Her tears dripped onto the phone screen as she scrolled. Her sobs were loud, so loud the couple two tables over stopped their conversation to stare. I sat frozen, nodding weakly, my stomach twisting into knots. It wasn't just grief. It was desperation. Between sobs, she looked up at me with this wild intensity in her eyes, the kind of look that makes your chest tighten instinctively. Her voice broke as she whispered, "I can't be alone anymore." Before I could even react, she reached across the table and grabbed my hands in hers. And then she asked me to move in. Not as a joke. Not as some half-serious comment. She begged me to. Tears streaming down her face, she clutched my hands like they were the only things keeping her from drowning. "Please," she whispered, I can't take it anymore. My house feels so empty. I need someone there. I need you." My body froze. My mind screamed at me to run, but my face tried to stay neutral, careful. Her grip was too tight, her voice too frantic. The way she looked at me wasn't just sad, it was possessive. Like she'd already decided I was hers, like I didn't get a say in the matter. The cafe air felt heavy, suffocating. I could feel the stares of strangers burning into me, watching this meltdown unfold. My throat went dry, my palms slicked with sweat. She wouldn't stop. Every time I tried to pull back, she'd shove more photos toward me, crying harder. Each one came with another desperate plea. "You're the only one who understands," she whispered. "You get it. I can feel it. You're different. We just met." I muttered excuses, mumbling about needing to get going soon, but she clung tighter. Her sobs rose into choked wails, loud enough that the barista glanced over from behind the counter, concerned, unsure whether to intervene. The way she looked at me, red-faced, swollen-eyed, manic, scared me more than her words. She wasn't just lonely. She was unstable. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up. My chair scraped against the floor with a loud screech, drawing even more eyes. "I'm sorry I have to go," I muttered, pulling my hands free. My legs felt shaky, my chest pounding as I turned toward the door. I didn't look back, not at first. I just pushed outside into the cool air, breathing like I'd been underwater too long. But halfway down the block, I made the mistake of glancing back through the cafe window. She was still sitting there, phone in hand, her face blotchy with tears. Her eyes weren't on the screen, though. They were staring out the window, staring at me. My phone buzzed before I even got to the end of the street. Messages, paragraphs, dozens of them back to back. Pleas for me to come back. Voice notes of her crying, begging me not to leave her alone. Telling me I was meant for her. That was her only chance. By the time I got home, the notifications hadn't stopped. It was a flood. Desperate apologies, then sudden anger, then apologies again. I blocked her number that same night, deleted our messages, deleted the app, but lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop hearing her voice. The way her sobs had cracked in public, the way her fingers dug into mine across that sticky cafe table. And worse, the way she looked at me like she had already decided I belonged to her. That look haunts me more than anything. Because for a moment, trapped under her grip and her desperation, I almost believed it. Looking back, I should have never gone up to his apartment. I told myself I wouldn't. I swore I wouldn't, but somehow I ended up there anyway. It wasn't even like the date had gone terribly. Honestly, it was just average. Dinner, a couple of drinks, the kind of small talk that doesn't really go anywhere. I wasn't blown away. I wasn't disgusted. He seemed fine enough, maybe a little pushy, but nothing that screamed danger. I wasn't interested enough to see him again, though. I knew that much. But he was persistent. When we finished our second round, he leaned in with that eager smile and suggested we head back to his place for just one more drink. I shook my head at first. I said I should get going, that it was late, but he kept pressing, not in an aggressive way, just insistent. Charming, even, in a slippery sort of way. He made it sound harmless. Come on, just one more. You'll love the wine I've got. And against the voice screaming in my head, I caved. The outside of his building looked normal enough. One of those old apartment complexes with faded brick, peeling paint around the entryway and carpets in a hall that had seen better decades. The elevator creaked as it rose, and the air inside smelled faintly of dust and metal. The whole ride up, I kept telling myself I'd only stay for a few minutes. One drink, maybe two. Then I'd make an excuse, say I had an early morning, and leave. When he opened the door, I braced myself for chaos. I'd been in enough bachelor apartments to expect clutter, dirty dishes, maybe a stale smell. But his place was cleaner than I expected. Minimal furniture, neutral walls. A faint, citrusy scent of air freshener lingering in the air. It was almost too clean, too staged. He told me to make myself comfortable while he went to the kitchen to grab drinks. I hovered awkwardly in the living room, pretending to look at the framed art on the wall. And that's when I noticed the shelves. 4 of them lined neatly against the far wall. At first glance, I thought they were filled with knickknacks or maybe collectibles, something harmless. But when I stepped closer, my stomach tightened. They weren't books. They weren't decorations. They were women's things. The top shelf was covered in earrings. Dozens of them, mismatched pairs hanging from hooks, some tiny studs, some dangling hoops, arranged carefully like they were being displayed. The next shelf down had scarves, folded and stacked into neat piles, each one a different color or fabric. Silk, cotton, knit. The shelf below that was worse. Makeup bags, compacts, lipsticks, perfume bottles, not new, not shiny. Half-used, smudged. The kind of things women keep in their purses, carry with them everywhere. My breath caught in my throat. My palms went damp. And then I saw the bottom shelf. That's where the ID card was. Wedged between a small clutch purse and a set of house keys, it sat there like evidence waiting to be found. The photo was of a young woman I didn't recognize. Different name, different address. The picture looked recent. The card wasn't expired. My chest constricted. None of this made sense. Why would he have these things? They weren't souvenirs you'd pick up casually. They weren't decorations. They were personal, intimate belongings. It looked taken. I leaned closer to the scarves and noticed frayed ends, little stains. The earrings weren't shiny. Some had missing backs. The makeup bags were dirty, smudged with powder. These weren't props. These weren't store-bought trinkets. They belonged to people. My mind raced, replaying every warning sign I'd brushed off that night, his pushiness, his insistence I come upstairs, the way his smile seemed almost rehearsed when I hesitated. I strained my ears toward the kitchen. He was still in there, humming to himself as he opened a bottle, completely at ease. My chest pounded so hard I was sure he'd hear it. I wanted to leave immediately, but I didn't know how to move without drawing attention to myself. My legs felt locked in place like the air itself was pressing me down. My eyes darted back to the ID card. The woman's face stared up at me from that stiff license photo, frozen, unblinking, and all I could think was, where is she now? I stepped back slowly, my fingers tightening around my bag. Every movement felt like it could shatter the silence and expose me. My brain scrambled for excuses, a headache, an early shift, anything to get me out of there fast. He came back into the room then, 2 glasses in hand, smiling like nothing was wrong. Like this was just another date. I forced a smile, my lips trembling, and muttered something about needing to go. His smile faltered, just for a second. Something flickered in his eyes, confusion, maybe irritation, but then it was gone. Already? He asked lightly. You sure you don't want to stay a little longer? I shook my head, moving quickly toward the door. My hands gripped my bag strap so tightly it hurt. He called after me again, his voice casual but carrying a weight I didn't like. Come on, at least finish a glass. I didn't answer. I didn't look back. I yanked the door open and stepped into the hall, my legs unsteady, my lungs burning. The walk down the hallway felt endless. The buzzing lights above, the peeling paint, the faint hum of the old building. Every detail carved into my brain as I forced myself not to run. Only when the elevator doors slid shut did I finally exhale. My hands shook violently as I clutched my bag to my chest, replaying the shelves over and over in my head. The earrings, the scarves, the makeup bags, the ID card. I don't know what those things meant. I don't know how he got them. Maybe he stole them. Maybe it was something worse. But I do know one thing, they didn't belong in his apartment. And they sure as hell didn't belong to him. I left that night and never spoke to him again. Blocked his number before I hit the street. Unmatched him. Deleted the app. But even now I still see those shelves when I close my eyes. All those women's belongings lined up neatly like trophies, and the ID card staring up at me like a piece of someone else's story I'll never know. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder how many more shelves he has that I didn't see. I knew something was off about halfway through the date, but by then I was already stuck at the table, nodding along and pretending to care. The night started fine, even good, which is what makes it so weird to think back on. She seemed great at first. We met on an app. Her profile had all the usual stuff. Smiling selfies, pictures of brunch, a couple of vacation shots that looked straight out of Instagram travel ads. She had this outgoing energy in her messages, and she suggested meeting for drinks right away. That felt kind of refreshing. I thought, all right, she seems confident, why not? The bar she picked was busy but not too loud, the kind of place where you can still hear each other talk. When she walked in, she looked like her pictures, maybe even better. She smiled big, hugged me like we were already friends, and for the first few minutes, it actually felt like it was going to be fun. We ordered drinks, started chatting about random things, movies, food, the usual small talk. But pretty quickly, I noticed she kept steering things in one direction. Money. Not in a subtle way either. She kept dropping these hints about how much she worked, how she was building something, how she didn't want to waste her life working for someone else. I'd brushed it off at first, thinking maybe she was just ambitious. But then she started bringing up her business. The way she said it made it sound important, like it was already successful. She kept saying how it was the future, how she had this opportunity that was going to blow up soon, and how she was only sharing it with a small group of people she trusted. At first, I thought she was just talking about her job. Then she pulled out her phone. Right there at the table, she flipped it around and started showing me graphs, screenshots, testimonials, all these glossy images that looked like they were ripped from a scammy Facebook ad. She went into this long spiel about how easy it was to get in, how she was already making crazy returns, and how if I was smart, I'd jump in now. My drink sat untouched as she talked. I kept trying to change the subject, but she'd laugh it off and circle back. Every question I asked about her, hobbies, family, anything normal, she twisted it back to her business. She kept saying how she was only looking for people in her life who were serious, who had vision, who weren't afraid to invest in themselves. It stopped feeling like a date and started feeling like I was trapped in some recruitment pitch. I glanced around the bar, trying to ground myself. Everyone else was laughing, clinking glasses, enjoying their nights. And here I was stuck listening to a stranger explain why I needed to wire her money before midnight. The pressure built as the night went on. She leaned in close, lowering her voice like she was telling me a secret. She said she could get me in if I acted tonight. She even started typing numbers into her phone, showing me how easy it would be to set up a transfer. My chest tightened as I realized she wasn't joking. She actually expected me to send her money right there in the middle of the date. I tried to laugh it off, but she didn't budge. Her smile was wide, her eyes locked on me, and she kept repeating how I'd regret it if I didn't act now. The way she said it sent a chill through me. It wasn't playful. It was intense. I checked the time on my phone, desperate for an excuse to leave. She noticed and leaned in even closer, asking me how much I had in my account. My stomach dropped. That wasn't flirty. That was predatory. I mumbled something about needing to use the bathroom and slipped away. My reflection in the mirror looked pale, my hands shaking as I gripped the sink. I stood there for a few minutes, my heart racing, trying to figure out how to get out without making it worse. When I walked back out, she was waiting with her phone screen open, a transfer app pulled up, the numbers already typed in. She pushed it toward me, urging me to just hit confirm. That was it for me. I grabbed my coat, muttered that I had to go, and walked straight out of the bar. She called after me, but I didn't turn around. My chest was tight, my pulse hammering, but I didn't stop until I was halfway down the street. My phone buzzed the whole way home. First with messages that were casual, then more aggressive. She kept saying I was making a mistake, that I wasn't serious, that I didn't deserve the chance she offered me. I blocked her before I even got to my front door. I sat in my room after, staring at the dark ceiling, thinking about how quickly a fun night turned into something twisted. It wasn't just that she asked for money. It was how natural she made it seem, how confident she was that I'd give in, how much of the date was never about me at all. It wasn't a first date. It was a setup. And I'll never forget the way she smiled while pushing that phone across the table, waiting for me to ruin myself with one tap. I still can't believe how normal it all started. If you told me at the beginning of that night how it was going to end, I would have laughed. The date actually went great at first. He looked like his pictures. He was funny, easy to talk to, and we clicked right away. We met at a little diner, nothing too fancy, and ended up talking for hours like we'd known each other longer than a week of messages. The whole time I was thinking, finally, a decent date. No awkward silences, no weird vibes. Just food, laughs, and a guy who seemed interested in me for real. When the check came, I even thought I'd see him again. That's how smooth it was. But then he suggested we go meet some of his friends. He said they were nearby, hanging out, and he wanted to introduce me. Normally, I'd say no, but the night had gone so well that I didn't even hesitate. I figured it would just be a chill group, maybe a house party or something casual. We walked a few blocks to this old house. From the outside, it didn't look like much. Run down, peeling paint weeds in the yard. Not the kind of place you'd expect a bunch of people to be hanging out, but I shrugged it off. He seemed comfortable, like he'd been there plenty of times. He let me inside. The lights were dim, the air smelled musty, the hallways were quiet. Too quiet. I expected to hear voices, music, laughter, something, but the place felt empty. He told me they were downstairs. That's when my stomach started to twist. We reached a heavy wooden door at the end of the hall. He pulled it open and motioned for me to go first. I hesitated, staring down at the narrow staircase disappearing into darkness. He gave me this little smile, encouraging me to go. Against my better judgment, I stepped down. The basement was nothing like I expected. The air was damp and cold, and the only light came from candles lining the walls. They flickered, casting long shadows across the room. And then I saw them. People. At least a dozen of them, standing in a loose circle, all dressed in plain, dark clothes. None of them spoke. None of them moved. They just watched me as I came down the last step. My chest tightened instantly. My instincts screamed at me to turn around, but when I glanced back, he was right behind me, closing the door. I heard the click of a lock sliding into place. That sound made my whole body go cold. I stood frozen as the circle of people slowly shifted, closing in. Their faces were blank, their eyes fixed on me. The silence was unbearable. I tried to speak, to say something, but my voice caught in my throat. Then one of them stepped forward. He was older, tall, with a shaved head and eyes that didn't blink. He looked me up and down like I was being judged. Finally, he spoke. He said something about a new sister and the path. His voice was steady, rehearsed, like he'd given this speech 100 times. My heart hammered in my chest. I glanced at the guy I came with, hoping for some kind of explanation, but he just smiled faintly, like this was all perfectly normal, like this had been the plan all along. The older man raised his hands, and the others echoed him. They started murmuring low and rhythmic words I couldn't make out. The sound filled the room, bouncing off the walls, building until it felt like the air itself was vibrating. I backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The circle tightened. My legs shook, my hands clammy at my sides. I thought about running up the stairs, but the locked door loomed above me, and he stood in front of it like a guard. The chanting grew louder, and my panic spiked. I could feel dozens of eyes burning into me, expecting me to, what? Join them? Kneel? Give in. I forced myself to move, edging sideways toward a small gap between two people. My pulse pounded so loud I could barely hear. I shoved through, breaking the circle, and the murmuring faltered. A few hands reached out, brushing against my arms, but I tore myself free. I bolted for the stairs. The guy shouted something behind me, but I didn't stop. I slammed into the locked door and clawed at it, desperate. My fingers found the latch, and by some miracle it slid open. I flung the door wide and sprinted into the hallway. I didn't look back. I didn't care who followed. I ran through the house, past the peeling walls and empty rooms, and out the front door into the night. My lungs burned, my legs shook, but I kept running until I hit the main street, lit by traffic and noise. Only then did I stop, bent over, gasping for air. My mind spun with what I had just seen. A basement full of people, chanting in candlelight, waiting for me like I was some kind of offering. And the guy who brought me there, smiling, calm, like this was just part of the date. I never saw him again. I blocked him on everything that night, but the image of those faces in the candlelight, the sound of that chanting, the click of the lock behind me, those are things I'll never forget. And the worst part is knowing I wasn't supposed to leave that basement. I should have trusted my gut when she suggested meeting in a park at night. It sounded harmless enough when she said it. She framed it like this secret, quiet spot where we could actually talk without the noise of a bar or the stiffness of a coffee shop. I figured maybe she was just different, maybe tired of the cliche first date setups. She said it so casually, like she'd done it 100 times before. And me? I didn't think too hard about it. I just went along. The park was almost empty when I arrived. A few flickering lamps lit the winding path, throwing more shadows than light. Every time the breeze passed through, the branches overhead rattled, scattering leaves across the pavement. The air smelled faintly damp, like rain had fallen earlier. I checked my phone twice just to make sure I was in the right spot. There wasn't another soul around. For a second, I wondered if she'd even show up. And she did. She looked like her pictures, which was a relief. Same bright smile, same kind of effortless energy that came through in her texts. She waved when she spotted me, moving quickly, and that grin of hers made me relax a little. We found a bench under one of the lamps and started talking. At first it was normal. She had this bubbly way of telling stories, animated hands, little bursts of laughter that felt infectious. We traded dumb anecdotes about work, about growing up in the city, about terrible TV shows we secretly liked. For the first 20 minutes, I thought maybe this was going to be a decent date. Nothing earth-shattering, but not a waste of time either. I even remember leaning back at one point, staring up at the tangled branches overhead, and thinking, you know what? I'm glad I actually came out tonight. Then it all flipped. Movement caught my eye. Out across the grass, two figures were walking toward us. At first, I thought they were just passing through, maybe cutting across the park on their way somewhere else. But then I noticed their pace. It wasn't casual. It wasn't wandering. It was direct. They weren't drifting by. They were heading straight for us. A knot tightened in my stomach. My first thought was mugging, but I didn't want to overreact. My hand twitched toward my phone, then stopped. I glanced at her, waiting for her to notice, to react, to look uneasy. But she didn't. She didn't even look surprised. By the time they got close, she stood up casually and announced, "Oh, these are my cousins." She said it like she'd just forgotten to mention it before, like it was no big deal. My skin prickled instantly. Something was wrong. The two men didn't introduce themselves. They didn't smile. One stepped in front of me, blocking the path out. The other moved behind the bench, cutting off my escape the other way. My pulse hammered in my ears. It just stood there, tall and tense, until one of them spoke. His voice was low, steady. "Wallet, keys." Now, there wasn't any room for argument. I froze, my brain tripping over itself. My hand hovered near my pocket. I looked at her again, searching for an explanation, for some kind of reassurance, but she wasn't even looking at me. She crossed her arms and looked away. No shock, no confusion, no fear. That was when the realization hit. This wasn't random. This wasn't some unlucky chance encounter. I'd been set up. My hands trembled as I pulled out my wallet. The man in front of me watched every movement, his eyes sharp, like he was waiting for the slightest hesitation. I handed it over, and he flipped through it quickly before stuffing it into his pocket. Then he held out his hand for my keys. I hesitated, just for a second. The man behind me shifted closer, so close I could feel the heat radiating off his body. I didn't dare look back, but his presence loomed heavy, daring me to resist. My throat went dry. Slowly, I fished out the keys and dropped them into the waiting hand. The silence stretched out. My pulse thundered, my skin prickling with cold sweat. I kept waiting for them to demand more, to push it further, but they didn't. They just turned. Without another word, they slipped back into the shadows, my wallet and keys in their hands. She lingered for a moment. For half a heartbeat, I thought maybe she'd stay. Maybe she'd say something. Maybe there was some explanation that could make any of this make sense. But all she did was shrug, a small dismissive gesture, like this whole thing wasn't her problem. Then she followed after them. I sat there frozen on the bench, chest tight, ears buzzing. My legs felt like they weren't mine anymore, like they might give out if I tried to move. I don't know how long I stayed there before I finally forced myself to stand. When I did, my knees shook so badly I almost stumbled. The walk out of the park felt endless. Every flickering lamp, every shadow between the trees felt like another trap. My head whipped over my shoulder constantly, convinced they were still watching, waiting for me to make a wrong move. By some miracle, my phone was still in my jacket pocket. If it had been in my jeans, they would have taken it. My fingers trembled so hard I almost dropped it as I pulled up the rideshare app. The ride home was silent. I sat in the back seat, staring out the window, every muscle locked tight, trying to process what had just happened. Part of me wanted to believe it wasn't planned, that maybe she didn't know what was going to happen, that maybe those guys weren't really her cousins. But deep down I knew. She knew. She set me up from the start. The way she didn't flinch when they showed up. The way she said cousins without missing a beat. The way she walked away after without a word, like her role was already done. When I got home, I locked the door and sat in the dark for hours. My heart still wouldn't slow down. I blocked her on everything. I canceled my cards. I called the police to report my wallet and car stolen. But even as I explained it over the phone, I felt stupid. How do you admit you walked straight into something like that? It's not a story I tell often. It's not funny. It's not one of those bad date stories you laugh about later. It was real. It was planned. And it left me shaken for weeks. The worst part is I'll never know the truth. Maybe they really were her cousins. Maybe they weren't. Either way, I was never supposed to make it out of that park with my stuff. I don't think I'll ever forget the feeling of sitting across from him and slowly realizing he wasn't the person I thought he was. At first, everything seemed fine. He looked like his pictures. Same face, same hair, same kind of style. If you glanced at us from another table, you'd think it was just two people on a normal date. But the longer I sat there, the more things started to feel off. We matched on an app a couple weeks earlier. His profile seemed solid, funny bio, clear photos, nothing that screamed fake. We chatted back and forth, and he seemed easygoing, a little flirty but not too much. He suggested grabbing dinner, and I agreed. The spot he picked was a busy casual restaurant, so I figured it was safe enough. When I walked in, he was already at the table. He smiled, stood up to greet me, and everything seemed fine at first glance. I sat down, we ordered drinks. I remember thinking he looked almost too much like his pictures. That sounds dumb, but there was this weird stiffness about him, like he'd been practicing how to look. It wasn't until he spoke more that my stomach tightened. His voice wasn't the same. In his messages, he told me he did a lot of voice notes, so I already knew how he sounded, kind of laid back a little deeper. But the guy sitting across from me had a higher pitch, almost rushed, like he was nervous. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe the recording didn't match reality, but the doubt stuck in the back of my head. Then I noticed his height. His profile said 6 feet. He looked 6 feet in his pictures, standing next to friends, leaning against door frames. But in person, he was barely taller than me. I'm not short, so it stood out immediately. I told myself people lie about height online all the time, but paired with a voice, it gnawed at me. The tattoo sealed it. In his pictures, he had a distinct tattoo on his forearm, some kind of geometric design with sharp lines. I even remembered complimenting it when we were chatting. But sitting across from me, his arm was bare. Not faded ink, not covered up, bare skin. No tattoo. That's when the panic hit. He looked like the guy in the pictures, but the more I studied him, the more I realized he wasn't. His nose was slightly different, his jaw a little sharper. He had the same hair, the same general build, but the details didn't match. It was like meeting someone's twin, except I didn't know if he had a twin. I smiled weakly, trying to keep calm, but my head was spinning. Who was this? A brother? A cousin? Or some random stranger who got hold of the photos and built a fake profile? The worst part was he acted like nothing was wrong. He chatted easily, asked me questions, laughed at the right times. If I hadn't paid attention, I would have convinced myself it was fine. But once you see the cracks, you can't unsee them. Every time he leaned closer, I could see the subtle differences in his face. Every time he moved his hands, I noticed the missing tattoos. Every time he spoke, I thought about the voice notes and how different they sounded. My stomach was in knots. I tried to test him a little, casually mentioning things we talked about before. I brought up a story he told me about his dog, and he hesitated, then nodded vaguely like he was scrambling to agree. It wasn't smooth. It was like he only half knew the details. The more I tested, the more I realized he was improvising, making things up on the spot. The confidence he had at the start started to slip, and the nervous energy came through. His hands twitched on the table, his eyes darted too quickly. That's when I knew this wasn't some misunderstanding. This wasn't a brother covering for him or anything innocent. This was someone pretending. My throat felt tight, but I forced myself to stay calm. The restaurant was crowded, which helped, but I couldn't stop thinking about how easily this could have been somewhere quieter. I told myself not to show fear, not to lie that I knew. I made excuses. Said I wasn't feeling well, that I needed to head home early. He pressed a little, asking if I wanted to grab another drink first, but I stood firm. My hands were shaking under the table as I gathered my stuff. Walking out of that restaurant felt like dragging my body through mud. Every step felt too slow, like he'd reach out and stop me. But he didn't. He just stayed sitting there, smiling weakly, watching me leave. The second I hit the street, I booked it. I ordered a ride on my phone with my hands trembling so badly I could barely type. While I waited, I glanced back the restaurant window, and I swear I saw him still sitting there, just staring out at me through the glass. The ride home felt endless. My phone buzzed a couple of times with messages from the app, but I didn't open them. When I finally got inside my apartment, I blocked him everywhere. The thing that keeps me up isn't even the date itself. It's knowing I'll never have the full answer. Was it his brother? Some stranger who stole the photos? Or someone darker, using a mask of familiarity to lure people in? I'll never know, and that's what makes it so disturbing. I knew the date was going weird when she leaned in over her drink and dropped something that made my stomach flip. Up until then, it had been a pretty normal night. Nothing exciting, but nothing that made me want to run either. Just the usual awkward laughs, small talk, and overpriced food. We met on an app, of course. She looked good in her pictures, had this kind of bold attitude in her messages, and I thought it would be interesting. She picked a place, some mid-range restaurant with neon lighting and loud music, the kind of spot where people go more to be seen than to actually enjoy their meal. She showed up late, which already annoyed me, but when she walked in, she had this confidence, like the whole room noticed her at once. At first, it wasn't bad. She was funny, a little sarcastic, and she carried the conversation. I barely had to say much. She ordered a strong drink right away, then another one not long after. I figured maybe she'd just like to loosen up quickly. We were halfway through dinner when she casually leaned back, swirled her glass, and said something I'll never forget. She told me she was out on bail, just like that. No lead up, no hesitation. She said it almost proudly, like it was a story she liked to brag about. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. I thought maybe she was joking, but the way she kept talking, I realized she was dead serious. She said it was for assaulting her last boyfriend. She didn't even lower her voice when she said it, just looked me dead in the eye like she was waiting to see how I'd react. The table between us suddenly felt smaller. My chest tightened. She leaned closer and smirked, asking if I was tough enough to handle her. Those exact words. My stomach sank. Up until that point, she'd seemed like someone who just had a bold personality. But now everything she'd done earlier started to feel different. The way she interrupted me constantly. The way she snapped her fingers at the waiter when her drink took too long. The way her laughter sometimes came off sharp instead of friendly. It all clicked in the worst way. I tried to keep my face neutral, not wanting her to see how unsettled I was. My head was racing though, out on bail, for assault, on her last boyfriend. And now she's sitting across from me, looking at me like I'm some kind of test. She didn't stop talking either. She launched into this rant about how men always underestimated her, how she never let anyone cross her. Her tone wasn't light, it was intense, like she was daring me to say the wrong thing. I nodded along weakly, gripping my glass to keep my hands from trembling. The worst part was how casual she made it sound, like punching her ex in the face until the neighbors called the cops with just another funny anecdote. She didn't show a hint of guilt or regret. If anything, she seemed proud of it. I forced myself to take small bites of food just to look busy, but I couldn't taste anything. My throat was dry, my stomach in knots. I kept thinking about how quickly she might snap if I said something that rubbed her the wrong way. At one point, she reached across the table and tapped my arm harder than she needed to, laughing about some random comment. It wasn't playful. It was heavy, like she was testing how much force she could use. My skin prickled where her hand had been. I thought about leaving right then, but I was scared of how she'd react. If she got violent with her last boyfriend, what would stop her from lashing out here in the middle of the restaurant? The thought of her throwing a glass, flipping the table, or worse kept me glued to my chair. I checked the time on my phone, pretending I had to wake up early the next day. I told her I need to cut it short soon. She rolled her eyes, said I was boring, then ordered another drink anyway. I sat there, forcing myself to wait until she finished. Every second dragged on my chest tight, my eyes fixed on the exit. Finally, the check came. She didn't even pretend to reach for her wallet. She just watched me pay, sipping her drink slowly. I signed the receipt with a shaky hand and stood up as calmly as I could. Walking out of that place with her beside me was the longest few minutes of my life. She was talking loudly, laughing to herself like nothing was wrong. But I couldn't shake the image of her bragging about assaulting her ex, the way her eyes flashed when she said it. When we got outside, I told her I'd call her a ride. I pulled up the app quickly, desperate to get her away from me. She smirked again, said she didn't need my help, and wandered off into the night. I stood there frozen until she was completely out of sight. The second she was gone, I felt my body finally relax. My hands were still shaking as I walked home, every step heavy. I blocked her number as soon as I got inside. It wasn't the kind of first date where something dramatic happens in front of everyone. No screaming, no fight. But that made it worse in a way. It was quiet, unsettling, like sitting across from someone who could explode at any moment and wouldn't feel an ounce of guilt about it. And the part that sticks with me is how normal it all started. A laugh, a drink, a plate of food, and then a casual confession that made the whole night feel like a trap. I thought the date was going fine until the front doors slammed open and everything went sideways. We met through an app, nothing unusual. Her profile was as generic as they come. A handful of selfies, a couple of group shots. Nothing that set off alarms. She wasn't over the top, she didn't seem fake. And when we messaged, she was direct. Quick replies, short jokes, a little flirtation. It felt easy. She was the one who suggested dinner downtown. A little fancier than I'd normally go for, but I figured maybe she had good taste. It felt like a safe bet, a crowded restaurant, a public space, neutral territory. When I walked in, she was already there. She looked like her pictures, which was a relief, and had this confidence in the way she sat, like she belonged. I noticed the way people glanced at her as they passed. She drew attention without even trying. The start of the night was fine. Better than fine, actually. We ordered drinks, shared appetizers, and swapped stories about work, movies, random things. She wasn't nervous at all, which helped me relax. Most first dates have those awkward pauses where you're scrambling for the next question, but with her, conversation flowed. By the time our entrees came, I was thinking maybe this could lead to a second date. She was charming, she laughed easily, and nothing about her hinted at trouble. That's why the shift rattled me so hard. Halfway through my plate, the front doors slammed open, not just pushed. Slammed so hard the sound echoed across the room. Silverware clinked against plates. Heads turned. The entire restaurant stilled for half a second, like someone had pressed pause. Then he walked in. This man stormed through the doorway like he owned the place. Tall, broad shoulders, fists balled at his sides. His face was tight, furious, scanning the room with eyes that looked ready to kill. And then they landed on our table. I froze. He moved toward us without hesitation, cutting through the maze of tables like a heat-seeking missile. People shifted in their seats, their conversations dropping to hushed murmurs. I could give the scrape of a chair somewhere, the clink of a fork hitting the floor. I turned to her, expecting shock, maybe fear, but she wasn't startled, not even close. She smirked. Leaning back in her chair, swirling her wine lazily, she looked like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. No panic, no confusion, just calm, smug satisfaction. That's when it clicked. This wasn't an accident. He wasn't some random guy. She had known he would come. My stomach twisted as realization settled in. I wasn't on a normal date. I was bait, a prop in a scene she'd orchestrated for someone else's benefit. He reached the table and stopped, his chest heaving, his fists trembling slightly at his sides. The rage in his eyes wasn't the drunk kind. It was personal. The air went thick. I could feel every beat of my heart hammering against my ribs, could hear the faint hum of the restaurant's AC unit over the silence. My hands went slick around my glass. He glared at her, then at me, like he was sizing me out. His jaw flexed, his teeth grinding. For a moment, I was sure he was about to flip the table over and drag me into whatever drama was unfolding. She leaned forward, still smirking, and took a slow, deliberate sip of her drink. Every move was calculated. I wanted to stand up to say something, get out of the line of fire, but my body wasn't cooperating. My legs felt cemented to the floor, my tongue glued to the roof of my mouth. He slammed his fist against the table. The plates jumped. My drink tipped, spilling across the wood. I flinched so hard I almost knocked my chair over. Around us, people stared openly now, though no one moved to intervene. Waiters lingered near the kitchen doors, frozen like they were trying to decide if they should call security or just write it out. I glanced at her again, desperate for some sign this was going to de-escalate, but she still looked amused. That same twisted little smile, like he was performing exactly how she wanted him to. My skin crawled. I muttered something about needing the bathroom, though my voice barely carried. Then I stood, the legs of my chair screeching loudly against the floor, drawing even more eyes to me. His head turned, his gaze narrowing on me like he was deciding whether to block my path. For one horrible second, I thought he might grab me. But he didn't. He let me go. I forced my legs to carry me toward the back. Not too fast, not too slow, just steady. My lungs burned with the effort of not breaking into a run. I slipped past the bathrooms, through the hallway, and pushed through the side exit. The night air hit me like ice water. I stumbled under the glow of a streetlight, my hands trembling as I yanked my phone from my pocket. My fingers fumbled across the screen as I ordered a ride, my breath coming out in uneven gasps. I kept glancing at the restaurant door, half expecting it to burst open with him chasing after me, or worse, with her. But nobody came out. When my ride pulled up, I jumped inside so fast the driver gave me a startled look. I told him to just go anywhere but here. The ride home blurred. Streetlights smeared into streaks through the window as my phone buzzed. Messages from her. Short ones at first, "Where'd you go?" Then longer, accusations, teasing. A string of laughing emojis that made my stomach lurch. I blocked her before I even stepped through my front door. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my heart still racing, my body waiting for a fight that never came. My mind replayed every detail, the slam of the door, the heat in his eyes, or smirk when he stormed over. I realized how close I'd come to being caught in the middle of something I didn't understand. A game between two people that had nothing to do with me, except that she decided I could be a pawn. It wasn't just disturbing, it was terrifying. Because I wasn't chosen for who I was chosen because I was convenient, disposable. And the worst part, I'll never know what would have happened if I hadn't gotten up when I did. I thought it was going to be one of those normal, kind of boring first dates you just laugh about later. Nothing crazy, nothing memorable. Just dinner, small talk, maybe go home and then forget about each other. That's how it started. And if you'd asked me at the beginning of the night how it was going, I would have said fine. Totally fine. We met at this mid-range restaurant. Not super fancy, not a dive either, just one of those places with dim lights, wood tables, and an overpriced menu. He was already there when I walked in, sitting straight with his hands folded on the table like he'd been rehearsing for it. He smiled when he saw me, stood up, pulled out my chair. It was polite, kind of stiff, but not a red flag. The first hour was easy. We ordered food, made small talk, and everything seemed normal. He told me about his job, asked me about mine, asked where I grew up, what I like to do for fun. The conversation flowed, not perfect, but not awkward either. He laughed at the right spots, nodded when I spoke, kept his eyes on me without making it weird. I actually started to relax. Then the smallest thing happened, and everything flipped. He was telling me a story about a trip he took with some friends. At one point, he said a word. I don't even remember what it was now, something simple, like the name of a food on the menu, but he mispronounced it. Not in a big way, just enough to notice. Without thinking, I gently teased him about it. Not a mean way. Just a little laugh, a light joke, the same way you do with a friend. The second I said it, his face changed. It was like a switch got flipped. The smile dropped. His eyes went cold. He leaned back in his chair, staring at me like I'd just insulted his entire family. I froze, still half smiling, waiting for him to laugh it off, but he didn't. His jaw tightened, and then his hand slammed against the table so hard the glasses rattled. The sound cut through the whole restaurant. People turned their heads. A couple at the next table actually jumped. My chest seized up instantly, my heart hammering so hard I felt it in my ears. He wasn't joking, he wasn't being dramatic, he was furious. He started muttering under his breath, his fists clenching on the table, the muscles in his arms tense. I couldn't make out all the words, but I caught pieces. Stuff about respect. Stuff about people not laughing at him. It was like that little joke wasn't a joke to him at all. It was some kind of attack. I tried to calm the situation, speaking quietly, keeping my tone soft. But it didn't matter. He slammed the table again, louder this time, and a fork clattered to the floor. A waiter rushed over, asking if everything was all right, but he waved them off with a sharp movement, like he didn't want anyone interfering. The waiter backed away, eyes wide, and I was left sitting there trapped in this bubble of anger that came out of nowhere. The worst part was the silence between his outbursts. He would sit there, breathing heavy, staring at me with this blank expression, then suddenly pound the table again, over and over. Every time he did it, I jumped. People were definitely watching now, but nobody stepped in. They just looked, then looked away like it wasn't their problem. I couldn't even focus on the food in front of me. My hands were trembling under the table, clutching my napkin so hard it tore. All I could think was how fast everything had changed. 10 minutes ago, he was telling me about his favorite vacation spot. Now he looked like he wanted to tear the entire restaurant apart. I tried to keep my voice steady, telling him maybe we should call it a night. He stared at me for what felt like forever, his knuckles pressed white against the table, and then he leaned forward again. His voice was low but sharp, telling me he hated being laughed at. That was it, just that. Over and over. I knew that I had to get out. The problem was, I didn't want to set him off again by moving too fast. I waited until he finally sat back, breathing heavy, and I stood up slowly, pretending I was just going to the bathroom. He watched me the whole time, eyes narrowed, but he didn't stop me. Once I turned the corner toward the bathrooms, I kept walking straight out the back door. My legs were shaking so badly I thought I might fall, but I didn't stop. I pulled out my phone and ordered a ride, standing on the side of the street with my heart racing. I didn't look back until I was inside the car, and even then I kept checking the mirrors, terrified he'd come storming out looking for me. When I finally got home, I sat on my bed for hours replaying it. How quickly it went from fine to terrifying. How something so small, a mispronounced word, could trigger that kind of rage. I blocked his number, deleted the app, and never heard from him again. But what stays with me isn't the table pounding or the stares from everyone around us. It's that moment his face changed, like the person I've been talking to for the last hour just vanished and something else took over. That's the part I'll never forget. I'll never forget the sinking feeling I had when I walked into that cafe and realized the woman sitting at the corner table wasn't the one from the pictures. I've been talking to Sophie online for a couple of weeks. She looked young in her photos, probably late 20s, good smile, and nice hair. The type of person you wouldn't expect to even bother with dating apps because she already seemed like she had options. We messaged back and forth for a while, and I thought it was going somewhere. Nothing deep, just light conversations, some flirty banter, and she suggested we finally meet. So I show up early, nervous but not too much, just kind of curious. I ordered a drink and sat down near the window. I kept looking at the door, expecting her to walk in, expecting that same face I've been staring at in her photos for weeks. But instead, I got a tap on the shoulder. I turned around, and that's when everything flipped. The woman standing there was easily twice the age of the girl from the pictures. Her face looked worn, lines running deep around her eyes and mouth. Her hair was darker and shorter, uneven like it had been cut at home. She wasn't dressed like she was out for a date either, just a bulky sweater and jeans that looked a size too big. At first, I thought maybe it was her mom, or someone just saying hi by mistake, but she sat down across from me like she belonged there, like this was normal. I remember my throat going dry instantly because it was obvious now. I'd been catfished. I didn't even know what to say. I just stared, trying to piece it together when she leaned forward and said it herself. She told me she was the one I'd been talking to online. The girl in the pictures wasn't her. She admitted it flat out, no hesitation. Then she said the part that still makes me uneasy whenever I think about it. She told me she did it to teach me a lesson. Those exact words. I sat there frozen, waiting for her to explain what that even meant. But she just kept staring at me like I was supposed to understand already. She started talking about how people online are too shallow, only going for looks, how she wanted to see if I'd still show up if it wasn't the same person in the photos. She said it so casually, like this was some social experiment she was running, and I was just unlucky enough to be the subject. The longer she talked, the more off it felt. Her voice was calm, almost rehearsed, like she'd practiced this speech before. I wondered if I was the first guy she'd done this to, or if there had been others before me who walked into this same cafe and sat in that same seat. The thought made my skin crawl. I barely touched my drink. I kept glancing toward the door, wondering if I could just get up and leave without making a scene. But every time I shifted in my chair, her eyes locked onto me, sharp and unblinking. She wasn't smiling, she wasn't laughing. She was dead serious. She started bringing up things from our conversations online, twisting them around to make her point. If I had complimented the girl in the photos, she'd throw it back at me, saying it proved I only cared about appearances. If I mentioned wanting to meet in person, she acted like that was proof I was just looking for something shallow. It was like no matter what I said, she had some way to spin it into her little lesson. At one point, she pulled out her phone and showed me the profile again. Scrolling through the pictures I thought belonged to her, she told me the girl was someone she knew, someone who had no idea her photos were being used. That part hit me the hardest. This wasn't just a catfish, it was identity theft. I kept staring at the phone, realizing that the girl I thought I was talking to never existed in the first place. The whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that people around us knew something was off. The cafe was busy, but it felt like the two of us were sitting in a bubble. I wondered if anyone noticed how tense I was, how uncomfortable I looked. But nobody said anything. Nobody cared. Eventually, she leaned back in her chair and just stared at me. She asked if I learned something. That's how she phrased it. Like this was a class and she was a teacher. My chest felt heavy, my hands were sweating against my knees, and I just nodded without saying much. I didn't want to give her any more reason to keep me there. I excused myself, pretending I had to take a call. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might actually give me away. But she just nodded slowly, like she was satisfied. I walked outside and didn't look back. I stood around the corner for a few minutes, trying to breathe, trying to process what had just happened. My phone buzzed with a message from her profile, asking where I went, but I didn't even open it. I deleted the app right there on the sidewalk. Walking home, I kept thinking about how easily it happened, how I believed every photo, every message without once questioning it. And the part that unsettles me the most is knowing she planned it out. She didn't just pretend to be someone else. She had a whole script ready, a whole game she played before. It's not the kind of story you tell your friends and laugh about later. It doesn't feel like a joke. It feels like I walked straight into someone else's twisted idea of a game, and I'll never know how many others have been through the same thing with her. I always look back on that night and wonder how close I actually came to never making it home. It wasn't even supposed to be anything serious, just a casual date to grab food and maybe a drink. I had been messaging this guy for a bit, and he seemed normal enough. Kind of pushy about meeting up, but I figured it was fine. I thought it'd just be a couple hours, then I'd head home and crash. The restaurant was nothing special, just a small place near downtown. He was already waiting for me when I showed up. He wasn't bad in person, but he wasn't great either. Honestly, I knew within 10 minutes that I wasn't into him. Still, I stayed. I didn't want to be rude. We ate made awkward conversation, and I kept thinking about how to get out of there after dessert. When the night wrapped up, I pulled out my phone to order a ride, but he jumped in and said he'd drive me home. He made it sound like a polite offer, but there was this edge in his tone, like he wasn't going to take no for an answer. I laughed it off at first, telling him I'd just grab a car myself, but he kept insisting. The way he leaned forward, looking directly at me, I felt cornered. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I told myself it was just a short drive, nothing would happen. We walked up to his car, and that's when I noticed it. The car itself was older, not in terrible shape, but definitely worn down. The paint had scratches all over it. The inside smelled faintly of cigarettes, and the passenger seat was cluttered with random trash he quickly tossed into the back. I slid in, trying not to think much of it. I told myself it was fine. As soon as I sat down, I went to pull the door shut, and that's when I realized the handle on the inside was missing. Just gone. Not broken, not loose, but completely removed, like it had been unscrewed and taken out on purpose. I stared at the empty space where it should have been, my stomach tightening. He didn't acknowledge it, didn't say anything, just started the car like nothing was weird about it. I tried the window next, reaching for the button, but when I pressed it, nothing happened. The switch was dead. I pressed it again harder, even tried the back one, but none of them worked. Every single window was sealed shut. My chest felt heavy when I realized the only way out of that car was through his side. I sat back, pretending to be calm, but my mind was racing. I thought about asking him why the handle was missing, but something in me stopped. I didn't want to let him know I noticed. I didn't want to give him any reason to know I was scared. The ride itself felt like it lasted forever. He didn't take the direct road home. He started weeding through side streets, long turns, empty roads that I'd never been on before. I kept glancing at the GPS on my phone, holding it low in my lap so he wouldn't see. At one point, I noticed he had the locks clicked down on his side, not the automatic ones, but the manual kind. I could hear the click when he pushed it down, like he wanted to make sure I knew. I tried to think of something to say, anything to make the atmosphere lighter, but my throat was tight. I could hear my heart beating louder than the music playing quietly from his radio. Every stoplight felt like an opportunity to run, but with no handle and no working window, I was stuck. I kept my phone in my hand, my thumb hovering over a text draft to my friend. I typed out where I was and who I was with, ready to hit send if things got worse. But even that felt risky, like he noticed me typing and get angry. Finally, after what felt like half an hour, we got closer to my street. I told him to pull over at the corner, but he ignored me. He kept driving straight, passing it like he didn't hear me. I said it again, trying to keep my voice steady, but he still didn't stop. It wasn't until I reached over and put my hand on the steering wheel slightly that he reacted. He snapped his head toward me, eyes sharp, and slowed down. He turned onto another side street, quiet and dark, and for a second I thought that was it. My chest was burning, my palms sweaty against my phone, and all I could think was how trapped I was in that seat. Then suddenly he stopped, just parked in the middle of the road. He leaned back in his seat, staring at me, not saying a word. The silence was unbearable. My body was frozen, but my brain was screaming at me to move, to do something. I reached down, pretending to adjust my bag, and that's when I noticed the lock on my door wasn't fully pushed down. I don't know if he forgot or if it got stuck, but it wasn't flush like the others. My heart pounded as I quietly lifted it with my fingertips. The door still didn't open because of the missing handle, but I knew if I shoved hard enough from the outside, I could maybe slip out. I didn't give myself time to overthink. I grabbed my phone, waited until he turned his head toward the windshield, and then shoved the door open with my shoulder. It flew outward just enough for me to squeeze out. I stumbled into the street, my bag hitting the ground, and I just ran. I didn't look back until I reached the main road. When I finally turned, his car was still there, headlights on, but he hadn't moved. He just sat there, watching. I don't know how long he stayed parked, because I didn't stick around. I ran all the way home, locked myself inside, and sat on the floor shaking until the sun came up. I deleted the app the next morning. I never saw him again, but I can still picture that missing door handle clear as day. I should have taken the hint when she suggested that bar. It wasn't the type of place I usually go to, but she made it sound like this cool little lounge where people hang out, not too loud, not too fancy. I figured whatever. A change of scene couldn't hurt. I'd been talking to her for a week or so, nothing deep, just normal messages. I thought she seemed chill enough. So I show up, and the first thing that hits me is how expensive everything looks. The lighting was low, the kind of golden glow that makes people look better than they actually do. The bartenders were dressed sharper than I was, and every table had these weird glass bottles with candles inside. Right then I already felt out of place. I told myself it didn't matter, I wasn't planning on ordering much anyway. I spotted her near the back. At first, I thought I'd mix her up with someone else because she wasn't alone. She was sitting with 3 other girls, all dressed up, sipping cocktails, laughing at something on one of their phones. She waved at me like it was no big deal. I walked over, feeling awkward as hell. I was expecting one person, not a whole crew. She introduced me quickly, barely even giving me a chance to process. The other girls looked me up and down like I was already being judged. I tried to sit down and just go along with it, but the vibe was off immediately. They weren't acting like friends tagging along. They were acting like they owned the place. The waiter came over, and before I could even look at the menu, the girls started ordering. Not just drinks, but the precious cocktails on the list, the ones with all the fancy ingredients and ridiculous names. 2 of them ordered champagne by the glass. I sat there pretending to scan the menu, my chest tightening with every word they said. My date didn't even look at me, just kept laughing with them. I ordered a simple beer, trying to keep things low. When the drinks came, they raised their glasses, clinking them dramatically, and I just sat there with my bottle, feeling like the punchline of some joke I didn't get. They didn't talk to me much. A few quick questions, half listening to my answers before turning back to each other. It was like I was invisible at my own date. After a while, the food menus came out. I didn't even want to eat, but they grabbed them right away and started pointing at the most expensive stuff. Steaks, seafood platters, fancy pasta dishes. They didn't even hesitate. My date ordered 2 appetizers and a main course, then added a dessert for later. I ordered nothing, just sat there picking at the free bread they brought to the table. The drinks kept coming. Another round of champagne, then cocktails I'd never even heard of. The waiter kept glancing at me, and it was obvious why. The girls weren't paying any attention to the prices. To them, it was just a fun night out. To me, it felt like a slow-motion nightmare, watching the numbers add up in my head with every glass they tipped back. I tried to remind myself that maybe they'd split it. Maybe it wasn't as bad as it seemed. But deep down I knew. None of them reached for their purses when the waiter came back. None of them even looked at the menu again, just ordered like money didn't matter. I sat through it, smiling weakly, nodding when they said something, laughing along at jokes I didn't even hear properly. My stomach was knotted the whole time. Then, halfway through what must have been their 3rd round of cocktails, my date leaned over to her friends and whispered something. They all burst out laughing, the kind of laughter that's sharp and directed. I felt my face burn. I didn't know what she'd said, but I knew it was about me. And then, just like that, they stood up. One of the girls said they had to use the bathroom, and the others followed. My date gave me a quick smile and said they'd be right back. They left their drinks half finished, their bags hanging on the chairs, like they were really coming back. I waited. 10 minutes, 15, 20. I kept glancing at the entrance, then the bathroom, then back to the table. The waiter came over after a while, asking if I wanted another drink. I said no, trying to play it cool, but I knew. They weren't coming back. Finally, the check landed on the table. I remember staring at it, my eyes running over the numbers again and again, like maybe they'd shrink if I looked hard enough. It was over 1,000. 1,000 for a night where I hadn't even eaten. My beer was probably the cheapest thing on there. I felt sick. My hands were shaking when I pulled out my card. I thought about walking out, just leaving, but the waiter hovered like he already expected me to pay. Everyone around me was dressed in expensive clothes, sipping their wine, not a single person looking my way. I felt trapped. When the receipt printed, the waiter didn't say anything. He just gave me that polite, fake smile like this wasn't the first time it had happened. I left the bar, my stomach hollow, my bank account destroyed, and the sound of their laughter echoing in my head. I walked down the street, replaying the whole night, realizing I'd been set up from the moment I walked in. It wasn't just a bad date. It was a scam, and I was the idiot who walked straight into it. I don't know why I agreed to go on that date. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was just wanting to feel like I was actually doing something with my life instead of staying in bed all weekend. He messaged me on one of those dating apps, nothing special, but he seemed normal enough. We exchanged a few short messages, nothing too deep, and I thought whatever, dinner couldn't hurt. When I walked into the restaurant, I didn't feel nervous. I just wanted the night to go by quick. It was one of those quiet spots, dim lighting, fake candles on the tables, background music that was more noise than actual songs. He waved at me from the corner, and honestly, he didn't look much different from his pictures. Not super good looking, but not bad either. The type of guy you wouldn't remember if you passed him on the street. We started with the usual small talk. Hobbies, family, or we grew up. I wasn't really that into it, just picking at the bread they set on the table and half listening. But then things started to feel off, like the conversation shifted into something heavier without me noticing. He casually mentioned my job. Not in the way people usually do, like asking where I worked, but he already knew. He said something about how annoying it must be to wake up early for the morning shifts and how the closing shifts drag on past midnight. That stopped me for a second because I never told him where I worked, let alone the weird hours I get stuck with. I laughed it off like maybe I'd mentioned it without remembering, but my stomach was already tightening. The food came, but I barely touched it. He kept talking, smoothly slipping in these little details about my life like he was pulling cards out of a deck one by one. He brought up my sister by name. He said it so casually, like he knew her. He described how annoying it must be living with someone who borrows my clothes without asking. I hadn't mentioned I even had a sister, let alone her habit of stealing my stuff. That's when I started actually listening to every word instead of zoning out. I watched him while he talked, how calm he was. His voice didn't even shake, like none of this was weird to him. I felt my face heating up, not from embarrassment, but because my head was racing trying to figure out how much he actually knew. I thought maybe he'd gone through my social media. But even then, I don't post my schedule. I never post my bedroom. He leaned closer at one point, like he was letting me in on some private joke, and started describing the layout of my room. He mentioned the posters above my bed, the little chipped corner of my mirror, even the color of my sheets. My stomach dropped. There was no way he could know that unless he'd actually been inside. I wanted to leave right there. I had my bag on my lap, ready to just excuse myself and get out, but I froze. My mind kept replaying what he said, and I swear I could almost see him standing in my room, going through my things, memorizing every detail. I glanced around the restaurant, hoping maybe someone would notice how uncomfortable I was, but nobody looked our way. Couples and families were just minding their own business. He sat there across from me, eating so calmly, barely even making eye contact like he didn't need to, like he already had control over the whole night. Every time I shifted in my seat, his eyes flicked up just for a second, almost like he could read exactly when I was about to move. He brought up how I keep my window cracked open at night because my room gets too hot. That one nearly made me gag. I sat there chewing the inside of my cheek, realizing he'd probably been outside my house before, watching me. I forced myself to keep a neutral face, nodding at whatever he said, but inside I was panicking. I didn't want him to know I was scared, because with that was exactly what he wanted. My hands were sweating under the table, gripping my phone like a lifeline. He wasn't even asking questions anymore, just stating things, like listing off a checklist of everything he knew about me. My bus route, the coffee place I go to before work, even the exact brand of perfume I keep in my bag. I kept thinking about all the times it felt like someone was following me late at night, and I brushed it off as paranoia. I made up some excuse halfway through the meal, something about feeling sick. I don't even remember what I said exactly. My voice barely came out steady. He didn't argue. He just smiled this weird little smile, like he'd already predicted I'd leave. He told me to text him when I got home safe. The way he said it made my skin crawl. I walked out of the restaurant as fast as I could without running. My hands were shaking so bad, I almost dropped my phone trying to order a ride. The whole way home, I kept checking the windows of the car, expecting to see him following me somehow. When I finally got inside, I locked everything. Windows, doors, even the bathroom window. I turned on all the lights and just sat on my bed, staring at the walls he had described so perfectly. It felt like the walls themselves were taunting me, reminding me he'd been here. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound outside made me jump. I blocked him on everything, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't even need the apps to find me. He already knew too much. It's been a while since then, but I can't walk home alone without looking over my shoulder. And when I get into bed at night, I don't just close the window. I shove something heavy in front of it. The worst part isn't even what he said. It's the way he said it. Calm, steady, like it was nothing. Like my entire life was just something he'd been studying for months, and I'll never know how far he's willing to go with it. I thought meeting at a hotel bar would be safer than some random dive in the city. That was my mistake. He suggested it because he said he was staying nearby for work, and I figured fine. Public place, decent lighting, people around. It sounded safe enough. At first, it wasn't weird. The bar was quiet, just a few scattered guests nursing drinks, soft music playing. We sat at a high top near the window, ordered drinks, and made small talk. He seemed a little intense, but not in a way that immediately set off alarms. The kind of guy who would ask a lot of questions but stares too long while you answer. Halfway through my drink, he leaned in and said he wanted to show me something. I brushed it off, but he insisted. He kept talking about how the view from his room upstairs was incredible, like the city lights stretched out forever. Against my better judgment, I let him lead me to the elevator. My brain kept saying it was just a hotel. There were cameras everywhere. I could leave whenever. The room door clicked open, and that's when everything flipped. The space was almost completely empty. No bed, no suitcases, no signs anyone was staying there. Just a single chair in the middle of the room, facing a small desk. On the desk was a laptop. And on the screen of that laptop was a live video feed of my apartment building's front door. My stomach dropped so hard it made me dizzy. I walked in slowly, pretending not to notice right away. My eyes scanned the walls. There were notes pinned up, pages full of handwriting, some with maps of the neighborhood where I lived. Others were just lists, times I left for work, times I got home, when lights turned off in my place when groceries were delivered. He'd been keeping track of everything, down to which days I wore certain jackets. I felt my face go hot, but I forced myself not to react. He was standing behind me, way too close, watching me look at it all. I didn't move, didn't flinch. I just laughed weakly, muttered something about needing the bathroom, and walked past him toward the door on the side. Inside the bathroom, I locked the door and stood there gripping the sink, trying not to freak out. I couldn't stay in there long or he'd know something was up. I turned on the tap just to make it sound normal, then took a deep breath and walked back out like nothing was wrong. He was sitting in that chair now, still facing the laptop. The screen was still filled with that view of my apartment door, as if he wanted me to keep staring at it. He asked me to sit too, gesturing to the edge of the bed frame that wasn't even made. My heart was pounding so loud it felt like the walls could hear it. I sat down, but only for a second. I leaned forward, pretending to tie my shoe, my brain racing for an excuse to leave. That's when I noticed his phone sitting on the desk next to the laptop. The screen lit up, and for just a split second I saw a picture of me. Not from tonight, but from a random day outside my building weeks ago. My hands started shaking and I shoved them into my pocket so he wouldn't see. I needed to get out without him suspecting. If he knew I figured it out, I didn't know what he'd do. I glanced at the clock on the wall and mumbled about how early I had to be up the next morning. I smiled, stretched, acted like I was just tired. He didn't move at first, just sat there watching me with that blank expression that made my skin crawl. Finally, he stood up and walked toward the door. For a second, I thought he was being polite, holding it open for me. But he didn't open it. He just stood there, his back against the door, arms crossed. My chest tightened. I forced myself to keep smiling, walking slowly toward him like nothing was wrong. When I got close, I faked a cough, covering my mouth, and angled my body just enough to slip by and grab the handle. The second my fingers touched the cold metal, I pulled it down and pushed past him, stepping into the hallway. I didn't wait for him to say anything. I didn't wait for him to follow. I just walked fast and faster, then broke into a run the second I hit the elevator. My legs were shaking so bad I almost tripped getting inside. The ride down felt like it took hours. When the doors opened, I bolted straight out of the hotel and into the street. I didn't look back. When I got home, I stayed up all night staring at my own front door, wondering if his camera was still watching. I called my landlord the next day, demanded the locks be changed, and stayed with a friend for a week. I never heard from him again, but sometimes when I walk past reflective windows or see a parked car near my building, I swear I feel like I'm being watched. That was the first and last time I ever agreed to meet at a hotel bar.